Hello, I'm Nikias Klohr, Head of R&D here at Result, and in this video I would like to talk about the improvements that were made from the V2 to the V3 transponder, especially talking about accuracy of the transponder. As you might know, the V2 to V3 transition happened about 2 years ago from now, and back then we were able to really improve the product quite significantly, and in this video I would like to explain a little bit of what we've done and how we can prove it. So the first thing that we did is we have a now patented algorithm of how we process the loop data that the transponder collects while it's moving over the loop. So you would ask, okay, why do we need some special algorithm? Well, here you see some data. Up here you see 3 different colors. And this is one passing, this is another passing, and this is the 3 different colors showing the 3 different axes of the 3 different coils that we have in the transponder, picking up the loop signal. And this is what the transponder sees when it goes across the loop, and somehow it has to determine when it was over the center of the loop. And in the past, for V2 and V1 transponders, it was quite a simple algorithm, just looking for the peak of the signal strength. But down here you can see that this is actually the peak of the signal strength, or this is the signal strength, and it is actually quite difficult to determine a true peak out of the signal. And with V3 we implemented a new, now patented algorithm, which is a little bit more clever, determining when the passing has to be created, meaning when was the transponder over the center of the loop. And I will not go into the details. If you want, you can read them yourself, just Google for our patent. But it is basically reflected down here. What we look is, we look at the symmetry of the data collected, and that's how we determine a passing time. So this has improved. And the other thing that has improved is, if you think about it, the transponder records a passing, records that timestamp, and it then has to transmit the time to the timing system. It does that over the 2.4 GHz channel, and basically what actually happens is that the transponder, a few milliseconds after it left the loop, determines, okay, loop is gone, I can apply this algorithm, determine the timestamp, and now I have to send a data packet down to the timing system, telling the timing system, 11 milliseconds ago, I was over the center of the loop. And the question is, if you tell the timing system 11 milliseconds ago, how precisely can you actually time the transmission of that data packet? And in V1 and V2 transponders, the timing of the transmission itself was overlaid with a random jitter. And in V3, we were able to precisely time the point in time when that data packet is sent, and therefore make sure that the data inside the packet, 11 milliseconds ago, is more precise. And you can see that in these 2 graphs here. So this is showing 2 different transponders. One is gray, one is orange. They were triggered at exactly the same time, and the randomness that you see in the difference of the 2 timestamps reported is purely because of data communication reasons. So this is the V2 and this is V3, same axis, and you can see that the randomness has shrunk. So I can tell you all this, but we can also look at real life data. And there we have one issue, that on real events is sometimes really hard to precisely compare precision. So what we typically do is we do outside tests just in front of our office, and this is the way we do it. Here we have a typical setup where we have a wooden bar. It's important that this is wooden, at the rear of a car. We have a photo finish camera, we have an Ubidium with a loop on the ground, and we drive over that loop at different speeds and compare the photo finish camera results with the results coming from the transponders. So this then looks a little bit like this. You have the picture of the photo finish camera, and you have the raw data coming from the system. And there it's most interesting to do loops or laps and compare the lap times. And in an aggregated form, I have results here. So you can see that the average difference between what the camera was saying and what the transponder was saying is basically 1/10 of a millisecond on average. This gives you an indication that there is no drift between the time base of the camera and the time base of the timing system, because if the average would differ more, then there would be different time bases. And the standard deviation between what the photo finish camera gave us and what the lap time from the transponder was is 3.6 milliseconds, which is in spec of what we specify with 4 milliseconds. And this is over 171 passings with 10 to 60 kilometers of speed. But to be honest, I don't think that this is really saying a lot. There's a different test that we do that I like a lot more. And that's looking at the order of the transponders when they are close to each other. So we have 50 millimeters between two transponders, roughly the width of a transponder. And if you do the math, if you take the accuracy that we promised, 4 milliseconds, and the 50 millimeter, you get an optimal speed for the test of 12.5 meters per second. So this is what the test setup looks like. We have 8 different transponders or V3 Pros on that wooden bar behind the car. We have 50% loop power, 0.5 meter wide. And what we actually look at is the order of the transponders coming in. Because the most interesting thing and what you should be looking at is if 2 participants come in close in a finish sprint, is the order correct? This is what is really important. So in this table here, you can see the order of the transponders coming through at different speeds. And the color directly lets you see where the order was incorrect. So we're not saying we are perfect. We are running this at the limit. As I said, 12.5 meters per second means we are running it at the specified accuracy. There are some points where you can see here, here, and here, and here, and here, where the order is not correct. But for the majority, over most of the speeds, the order is correct, even with the transponders being as close together as 50 millimeters. Maybe if you remember our old video about accuracy, back then I said that the typical accuracy for an active transponder like ours should be something like this, something like 16 centimeters. And this is the improvement that we got from V2 to V3. Now we are talking about 5 centimeters of true repeatable accuracy. So this is one thing that we improved. I talked about the way the transponder actually applies its algorithm to determine the timestamp of the center of the finish line in the middle of the loop. And I talked about the data transmission from the transponder to the decoder. The other thing that we were able to improve is the store mode. So I hope most of you know that our transponder offers a unique feature where you can store a time inside the transponder. Basically, the transponder is activated somewhere out in the field by a loop box in store mode, and it then carries the time of that activation to your finish line, to your next point where you can collect the data. How does that actually work? Well, it is named store mode, but it's not really a store function. Actually, what happens is the transponder, when it's coming over that remote loop, it starts an internal stopwatch. And then it has to keep track of the time that passed until it came to the finish line. And at the finish line, it will report, okay, 60 minutes, 10 seconds, and 100 milliseconds ago, I was over that store loop. And for that to work, the internal clock of the transponder has to be precise. Because if you start the stopwatch and you wait 60 minutes, the time that you report is dependent on how precise your clock runs in your stopwatch, meaning the clock in the transponder. And there we were also able to hugely improve the precision if you compare V2 and V3. So what we see here is a variance of 50 different transponders. So in total, we have 50 different times in here with 50 V2s activated, then waiting for 8.5 hours, and then seeing what time do they report. And this is in seconds, so this would be optimal, 0. And we see here it's up to minus half a second and up to 350 milliseconds too much reported by a V2 transponder after 8 hours in storage or in store mode, running the stopwatch for 8.5 hours. V3 is much better. Here you can see it's perfectly centered around 0, and the maximum deviation is 100 milliseconds after 8.5 hours of store mode. This is due to calibration in production. So every single V3 transponder is calibrated in production now. So there are no production variances in the field. There is another thing that we were able to do, which is a temperature compensation. So here you see after 8 hours of store at 0 degrees Celsius, it's basically freezing. Here you can see that the V2 transponder has a significant drift to longer times. So the average transponder was reporting half a second too much if it was run at 0 degrees compared to the real time. The V3 transponder compensates for that by measuring the temperature. So the V3 transponder in store mode will measure the temperature and will compensate for temperature and therefore also run reliably in store mode over all temperatures. Again, I can tell you measurement data from the lab, but I can also give you test data from real life tests. Same setup, Ubidium, loop, photo finish camera. And here we had a test time of roughly an hour. And you can see that against the photo finish camera within an hour, we had 9 milliseconds of difference for the V3 Pro transponders and 82 milliseconds of difference for the V2 transponders. So this is what I wanted to tell you about the improvements we were able to do in the V3 transponders. I can tell you that there's lots of engineering going into those developments. And yes, the V2 transponder was already a pretty good product, but I believe that the V3 transponder now is, in its class, one of the most precise transponders you can get. Thanks for watching.